October 1929. The kind of cold, relentless rain that soaks through wool coats and turns manicured lawns into mud. Camden, New Jersey. The Campbell Soup Company headquarters sits dark. Empty. The stock ticker has stopped. And in a mansion 30 miles away, perched on 300 acres of Pennsylvania countryside, John Thompson Dorrance Jr. stares at a telegram. 3 words. Fortune liquidated. Bankruptcy. The Campbell Soup Empire, the dynasty that turned tomatoes into gold, that built palaces with condensed soup money, that made the Dorrance family richer than the Rockefellers per capita, it's crumbling. But here's what no one tells you. The collapse didn't start with the stock market crash. It started decades earlier. With ego. With excess. With a family that believed wealth was permanent. And with a palace called Woodcrest. A 50-room estate that cost more to heat than most Americans earned in a year. Before we step inside, hit that subscribe button. We are documenting the rise and fall of America's greatest dynasties, and you won't want to miss the next episode. Because this isn't just about soup. This is about what happens when a fortune built on feeding the poor becomes a monument to greed. When family turns against family. When trust funds become weapons. And when the palace you built becomes the prison that destroys you. Let's go back. To the beginning. To 1869. Camden, New Jersey. A city across the river from Philadelphia. Industrial. Working class. Factories lining the waterfront. Joseph Campbell, a fruit merchant, and Abraham Anderson, an icebox manufacturer, they partnered. Started a canning company. Tomatoes. Vegetables. Jellies. Nothing revolutionary. Just decent quality canned goods for working families. The business was modest. Profitable. But modest. Then in 1876, Anderson pulled out. Sold his share. Campbell brought in a new partner. Arthur Dorrance. A produce dealer. Arthur's contribution wasn't money. It was connections. Farmers. Suppliers. Distribution networks. The company grew. Slowly. By 1894, Joseph Campbell was ready to retire. He sold the company. Not to Arthur Dorrance. Arthur didn't have the capital. Campbell sold to Arthur's nephew. A man who would change everything. John Thompson Dorrance. Born 1873. Pennsylvania. Educated. Ambitious. He had studied chemistry at MIT. Then went to Germany. Studied at the University of Göttingen. One of the finest chemistry programs in the world. Dorrance wasn't interested in canning vegetables. He was interested in innovation. In revolutionizing food preservation. In making a fortune. When he returned to America in 1897, he approached his uncle Arthur. Asked for a job at Campbell. Arthur was hesitant. The company was small. Barely profitable. They couldn't afford to pay much. Dorrance didn't care. He took a salary of $7.50 a week. $232 today. Barely enough to live on. But Dorrance wasn't there for the salary. He was there for the opportunity. Dorrance set up a laboratory. In the back of the Camden factory. It wasn't much. A few tables. Some beakers. A gas burner. But Dorrance was brilliant. He understood chemistry. Understood preservation. And he saw the problem with canned soup. It was bulky. Heavy. Expensive to ship. Because it was mostly water. Water that added weight. Added cost. Added nothing to nutrition or flavor. Dorrance had an idea. Remove the water. Condense the soup. Create a concentrated product that could be reconstituted at home. It wasn't a new concept. The military had been experimenting with condensed rations for years. But no one had made it work commercially. Dorrance worked for months. Testing formulas. Adjusting ratios. Trying to balance flavor, nutrition, and shelf stability. And in 1897, he succeeded. Condensed soup. A 10-ounce can that, when mixed with water, produced a full serving. The cost to produce? 3 cents per can. The retail price? 10 cents. A 300% markup. The profit potential was enormous. The Campbell Soup Company launched condensed soup in 1898. 5 varieties. Tomato. Consommé. Vegetable. Chicken. Oxtail. The marketing was brilliant. The red and white label. Designed to stand out on store shelves. The Campbell Kids. Cherub-faced children used in advertisements. Making soup seem wholesome. Family-friendly. American. The product was an instant success. Within a year, condensed soup was selling faster than the company could produce it. By 1900, Campbell was producing 16 million cans annually. The company expanded. Built new factories. Hired hundreds of workers. And Dorrance? He wasn't just an employee anymore. In 1900, the company gave him stock. A significant share. By 1914, Dorrance owned the company outright. Bought out the other shareholders. Joseph Campbell's name remained on the label. But it was Dorrance's company now. Dorrance's empire. By 1920, John Thompson Dorrance's net worth was estimated at $115 million. $3.5 billion in today's money. He was one of the richest men in America. Richer than most industrialists. Richer than most bankers. All from soup. Condensed soup. It seems absurd. But the numbers don't lie. Campbell Soup Company was producing over 400 million cans a year. Selling in every state. Exporting internationally. The profit margins were staggering. Because the product was cheap to make. Tomatoes. Water. Salt. Spices. Sugar. Nothing expensive. And the markup was enormous. A can that cost 3 cents to produce sold for 10 cents retail. After distribution costs, Campbell still made 4 cents per can. 4 cents doesn't sound like much. But multiply it by 400 million cans. $16 million in profit. Every year. 495 million today. And that was just profit. Not revenue. Profit. Dorrance could have lived comfortably. Could have built a nice house. Could have enjoyed his wealth modestly. But Dorrance wasn't modest. He was a tycoon. And tycoons don't live modestly. In 1916, Dorrance bought land. 300 acres in Radnor, Pennsylvania. The main line. The most exclusive suburb of Philadelphia. Where old money lived. Where the Wideners, the Cassatts, the Biddles built their estates. Dorrance wanted in. Wanted to prove that soup money was as good as railroad money. As good as steel money. Better. He hired architects. Not local builders. He brought in Horace Trumbauer. The most famous architect in Philadelphia. The man who designed the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The Widener Library at Harvard. Whitemarsh Hall for the Stotesbury family. The largest private residence in America at the time. Dorrance told Trumbauer to build him something unforgettable. A palace. 50 rooms. Limestone. Georgian style. Modeled after English country estates. No expense spared. Construction began in 1917. The timing was terrible. World War I was raging. Materials were scarce. Labor was scarce. Costs were skyrocketing. Dorrance didn't care. He paid whatever it took. Limestone was imported from Indiana. The finest quarries. Each block hand-cut. Hand-placed. The windows were custom-made. Leaded glass. Some of them stained glass. Depicting pastoral scenes. The front door was solid mahogany. Imported from Honduras. Hand-carved. 10 feet tall. 6 inches thick. It weighed over 1,000 pounds. Required a custom hinge system just to open. The interior was equally extravagant. Marble floors. Italian marble. White Carrara for the entry hall. Green marble for the library. Pink marble for the powder rooms. The wood paneling was oak. Quarter-sawn oak. The most expensive cut. Imported from England. Each panel hand-fitted. Hand-polished. The great hall was the centerpiece. 50 feet long. 30 feet wide. Ceilings 25 feet high. A double staircase. Sweeping. Dramatic. Marble steps. Bronze balusters. Hand-forged. Each one a work of art. At the top of the stairs, a massive stained glass window. Custom designed. Depicting the Dorrance family crest. Because Dorrance had commissioned a family crest. Hired a heraldry expert. Created a coat of arms. As if the Dorrances were nobility. As if soup money could buy aristocracy. The ballroom was on the second floor. 70 feet long. Gold leaf on the ceiling. Applied by hand. Layer after layer. Chandeliers. Crystal. Baccarat. Each one weighing over 2,000 pounds. Costing $50,000. 1.5 million today. Per chandelier. There were 3 of them. The ballroom alone cost over $300,000 to complete. 9.3 million today. For a room Dorrance would use maybe a dozen times. The dining room was designed to seat 40 guests. The table was custom-made. Mahogany. 25 feet long. 6 feet wide. Hand-carved legs. The chairs were upholstered in silk. Imported from France. Gold thread. Each chair cost $2,000. 62,000 today. 40 chairs. $2.4 million. Just for chairs. The china was custom designed. Porcelain. Made in Limoges, France. Gold rimmed. Each piece hand-painted with the Dorrance crest. A place setting for 40 guests cost $30,000. 930,000 today. 4 plates. The silverware was sterling. Heavy. Solid. Each piece weighed over a pound. Engraved with the Dorrance monogram. The cost of one place setting, just the china and silver, was $1,000. 31,000 today. Multiply that by 40. 1.2 million. 4 table settings. The kitchen was industrial. Dorrance wanted to be able to host elaborate dinners. Multi-course meals. 4 dozens of guests. So the kitchen was built like a restaurant kitchen. 8 gas stoves. Imported from France. Marble counters. Zinc sinks. Walk-in refrigerators. Cooled by ice. Because electric refrigeration was still new. Still unreliable. The kitchen staff, on a normal day, was 6 people. Head chef. Sous chef. 2 line cooks. Pastry chef. Scullery maid. But for large dinners, Dorrance would bring in additional staff. Hire temporary workers from Philadelphia. Because the meals had to be perfect. Every course. Every detail. Because Dorrance wasn't just hosting dinners. He was performing. proving that he belonged. That soup money was real money. Dorrance's bedroom suite was on the third floor. The bedroom itself was large, but not ostentatious. Dark wood. Leather. Masculine. A four-poster bed. A fireplace. A sitting area. But his bathroom. That was extravagant. White Carrara marble. Floor to ceiling. The bathtub was carved from a single block. It weighed 3 tons. Required reinforced flooring just to support it. The fixtures were gold. Not gold-plated. Solid gold. Because Dorrance wanted the best. And gold, in his mind, was the best. His wife, Ethel Dorrance, had her own suite. Separate. As was customary. Her bedroom was pale blue. Silk wallpaper. French furniture. Louis XVI style. Gilded. Ornate. Her bathroom was pink marble. Italian. The bathtub was also carved from a single block. But smaller. More delicate. The fixtures were silver. Polished daily. By her personal maid. Ethel had a dressing room. The size of most people's entire bedrooms. 30 feet long. Lined with mirrors. Closets filled with gowns. Hundreds of them. Custom made in Paris. New York. Philadelphia. Ethel changed her outfit 5 times a day. Morning dress. Afternoon dress. Tea dress. Dinner gown. Evening gown. 5 outfits. Every day. For the entire year. That's over 1,800 outfits. Each one costing hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars. Her jewelry collection was worth millions. Diamonds. Emeralds. Rubies. Pearls. Necklaces. Bracelets. Tiaras. She had a safe in her dressing room. Built into the wall. Fireproof. Burglar-proof. Because the jewelry was worth more than most people's houses. The estate, which Dorrance named Woodcrest, took 4 years to complete. By 1921, the total cost was $3 million. $93 million today. Just for construction. That doesn't include the furnishings. The art. The landscaping. Add all that in, and the total was closer to $5 million. $155 million today. For a house. A summer house. Because Dorrance also had a townhouse in Philadelphia. A winter house in Palm Beach. A hunting lodge in the Adirondacks. Woodcrest was just one of 4 homes. But it was the crown jewel. The statement. The proof that John Thompson Dorrance had arrived. The staff at Woodcrest was enormous. 40 people. Living on the property. In servants' quarters. Separate buildings. Behind the main house. Out of sight. Cooks. Maids. Butlers. Footmen. Valets. Ladies' maids. Laundresses. Housekeepers. Gardeners. Groundskeepers. Chauffeurs. Stable hands. Each one with a specific role. Each one invisible. The servants' quarters were plain. Simple. No decoration. Just beds and dressers. Shared bathrooms. Communal dining hall. They ate simple food. Leftovers from the family's meals. Bread. Soup. Occasionally meat. But nothing like what the Dorrances ate. They woke at 5 in the morning. Worked until 10 at night. 6 days a week. Sundays they got half a day off. They were paid poorly. $25 a month for a maid. $775 today. For 6-day weeks. 12-hour days. But they didn't complain. Because jobs were scarce. And working for the Dorrances, despite the long hours and low pay, meant stability. The head butler, a man named Charles, had been with the family for over 20 years. He managed the household. Supervised the staff. Made sure everything ran smoothly. He was paid $100 a month. $3,100 today. More than the other servants. But still a fraction of what Dorrance spent on a single dinner party. Charles lived in a small room above the garage. No windows. No heat. Just a bed and a dresser. He was loyal. Dutiful. He never complained. Never questioned. Because that was the deal. You worked. You stayed invisible. And in return, you got a paycheck. The cost of running Woodcrest was staggering. $150,000 a year. $4.6 million today. Just in operating expenses. Salaries. Food. Coal for heating. Oil for lamps. Later, electricity. Maintenance. Repairs. Landscaping. $150,000. Every year. For a house the family used maybe 6 months a year. Because winters were spent in Palm Beach. Springs in Philadelphia. Summers at Woodcrest. Falls in the Adirondacks. The Dorrances were always moving. Always traveling. Always performing. The heating bills at Woodcrest were astronomical. The house had a massive coal furnace. In the basement. It burned through tons of coal every month. Winter months, it could be 20 tons. At $30 a ton. $600 a month. $18,600 today. Just for heat. And the house was never really warm. The ceilings were too high. The windows too large. The rooms too numerous. No matter how much coal they burned, there were always cold spots. Drafty hallways. Freezing bedrooms on the 3rd floor. The servants' quarters had no heat at all. The staff had to bundle in blankets. Sleep in their coats. Because heating the servants' quarters would have been an additional expense. And Dorrance saw no reason for it. The gardens at Woodcrest were elaborate. Formal. English style. Hedges trimmed in geometric patterns. Flower beds bursting with roses, tulips, peonies. Fountains. Stone fountains imported from Italy. Water features. A koi pond. Stocked with imported Japanese koi. Each fish costing hundreds of dollars. The head gardener, a man named Thomas, supervised a team of 8. They worked year-round. Planting. Weeding. Trimming. Mulching. In the winter, they maintained the greenhouses. 3 greenhouses. Heated. Growing orchids. Exotic plants. Vegetables out of season. Because Dorrance wanted fresh produce year-round. Regardless of cost. The greenhouses alone cost $10,000 a year to maintain. $310,000 today. For vegetables. The isolation of Woodcrest was intentional. Dorrance chose the location because it was removed. Private. The estate was surrounded by walls. Stone walls. 8 feet high. Topped with iron spikes. Gates. Iron gates. Locked. Guarded. No one entered without permission. Because Dorrance valued privacy. Valued control. He didn't want strangers wandering onto his property. Didn't want to be seen unless he chose to be seen. But the isolation was also psychological. Dorrance was paranoid. Worried about kidnappers. About thieves. About competitors trying to steal his secrets. So he built walls. And he hired guards. Armed guards. Who patrolled the property day and night, making sure no one got in, making sure nothing got out. The parties at Woodcrest were legendary. Dorrance hosted them frequently. Summer galas, garden parties, formal dinners. He invited the Philadelphia elite, the Biddles, the Cadwalladers, the Cassats, old money families who had initially looked down on the Dorrances. But money talks. And Dorrance had more money than most of them. So they came. They ate his food, drank his champagne, admired his house. And they judged him. Quietly. Behind his back. Because to them, Dorrance was new money. Soup money. No matter how big his house was. No matter how expensive his chandeliers. He wasn't one of them. And he never would be. Dorrance knew it. And it ate at him. He tried harder. Spent more. Hosted bigger parties. Bought more art. More furniture. More everything. Trying to prove he belonged. But the harder he tried, the more desperate he seemed. And the old money families? They smiled. They accepted his invitations. But they never truly accepted him. The dinners at Woodcrest were elaborate. 12 courses. Each course paired with a different wine. French wine. Vintage. Expensive. The first course was always oysters. Blue Point oysters from Long Island. Served on ice. With champagne. Dom Perignon. Each bottle costing more than a servant earned in a month. Then soup. Ironic. The soup tycoon serving soup. But not Campbell's soup. That would have been gauche. No, Dorrance served French onion soup. Or consommé. Made by his French chef. From scratch. Then fish. Lobster or sole. Then a palate cleanser. Sorbet. Lemon or raspberry. Then meat. Roast beef or duck or lamb. Then vegetables. Asparagus. Artichokes. Imported. Then salad. Then cheese. French cheese. Multiple varieties. Then dessert. Multiple desserts. Cakes. Pastries. Ice cream. Then fruit. Then coffee. Then liqueurs. The dinners lasted 5 hours. 5 hours of eating and drinking and talking and performing. Because that's what it was. A performance. Every guest was an actor. Every course was a scene. And Dorrance was the director. Obsessing over every detail. Every glass. Every plate. Every conversation. Making sure everything was perfect. Because one mistake, one awkward moment, and the illusion would shatter. And he couldn't let that happen. But the fortune, the Campbell's soup fortune, it wasn't infinite. Dorrance believed it was. He spent like it was. $5 million on a house. $150,000 a year in operating costs. Hundreds of thousands on parties. On travel. On cars. Dorrance owned a fleet of cars. Rolls-Royces. Duesenbergs. Pierceros. Each one costing over $10,000. $310,000 today. He had a full-time chauffeur for each car. Because Dorrance didn't drive. Tycoons didn't drive. That was beneath them. The cars were kept in a garage on the property. A 10-car garage. Climate-controlled. Because Dorrance didn't want the leather to crack. Didn't want the paint to fade. The cars had to be perfect. Always. Even though he rarely used them. Because they weren't transportation. They were status symbols. Proof of wealth. Proof of success. The Campbell Soup Company, meanwhile, was thriving. By 1925, the company was producing over 1 billion cans of soup a year. 1 billion. The profits were enormous. $30 million a year. $930 million today. Dorrance owned the company outright. No partners. No shareholders. Every penny of profit went to him. He should have been secure. Should have been set for life. But Dorrance was spending faster than he was earning. The house. The cars. The parties. The staff. The travel. The art. The jewelry. The horses. Dorrance also bred racehorses. A hobby that cost hundreds of thousands a year. And generated almost no return. But he didn't care. Because it was prestigious. The old money families bred horses. So Dorrance bred horses. Trying to fit in. Trying to prove he belonged. His children, John Jr. and Eleanor, grew up in this world. This bubble of wealth. They never wanted for anything. Never struggled. Never worked. John Jr. went to Princeton. Not because he was academically inclined. But because that's where the sons of wealthy families went. He partied. He drank. He barely graduated. After college, he joined the family business. Not because he was interested in soup. But because it was expected. He was given a position. Vice president. A title. An office. A salary. But no real responsibilities. Because his father didn't trust him. Didn't think he was capable. John Jr. resented it. Resented his father. Resented the expectations. Resented the pressure. So he rebelled. Quietly. By spending. By living lavishly. By proving that he didn't need his father's approval. He just needed his father's money. Eleanor Dorrance married young. To a man named George Strawbridge. From another wealthy Philadelphia family. The wedding was at Woodcrest. June 1925. The weather was perfect. Sunny. Warm. The gardens were in full bloom. 500 guests. The ceremony was held on the lawn. Under a massive white tent. Custom made. The reception was in the ballroom. 12-course dinner. Orchestra. Dancing. The cost of the wedding was over $200,000. $6.2 million today. For one day. But to Dorrance, it was worth it. Because it was a performance. A display. Proof that the Dorrances had arrived. That they were equal to any family in Philadelphia. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Dorrance's health was declining. He was 57 years old. Decades of stress. Rich food. Heavy drinking. Smoking. Cigars. Constantly. It took a toll. He developed heart problems. High blood pressure. His doctors told him to slow down. To retire. To rest. But Dorrance couldn't. Because slowing down meant admitting weakness. And weakness, in his world, was unacceptable. So he kept working. Kept pushing. Kept spending. Kept performing. And the stress kept building. Then, October 1929. The stock market crashed. Black Tuesday. Fortunes evaporated overnight. Banks failed. Businesses collapsed. The Great Depression began. The Campbell Soup Company was hit hard. Sales plummeted. Because people had no money. Couldn't afford canned soup. Even cheap canned soup. They grew their own vegetables. Made their own food. The company's profits dropped. From $30 million a year to $10 million. Still profitable. But a 70% decline. And Dorrance, who had been spending based on $30 million a year, suddenly had a problem. Liquidity. Cash flow. His net worth was still high. Over $100 million. But it was tied up in the company. In real estate. In assets. Not in cash. And he needed cash. To pay the staff. To maintain Woodcrest. To maintain the lifestyle. He started selling. Art. Furniture. Cars. One of the Rolls-Royces sold for $3,000. $93,000 today. A fraction of what he paid. But he needed the cash. The racehorses were sold. At auction. For pennies on the dollar. Because no one was buying horses during the Depression. The jewelry. Ethel's jewelry. Some of it sold. Not all. But enough. The diamonds. The emeralds. Liquidated. Turned into cash. To pay the bills. But it wasn't enough. By 1930, Dorrance was struggling. Really struggling. The company was still profitable. But the profits weren't enough to cover his expenses. Woodcrest alone cost $150,000 a year. And the income was 70% lower. He started borrowing. Taking loans. Using the company as collateral. Using Woodcrest as collateral. Dangerous. Because if he couldn't pay back the loans, he would lose everything. His children didn't help. John Jr. was spending recklessly. Living in New York. Partying. Drinking. Burning through his trust fund. A trust fund worth $5 million. $155 million today. And he was burning through it. Within 5 years, it would be gone. Eleanor and her husband George were also spending. Building their own estate. In Gladwine, Pennsylvania. Another mansion. Another monument to ego. They asked Dorrance for money. He gave it. Because saying no would have been admitting he was struggling. And Dorrance couldn't admit that. Not to his children. Not to anyone. In 1930, Dorrance's health collapsed. Heart attack. Massive. He survived. Barely. The doctors said he had months. Maybe a year. He needed to retire. Needed to stop working. Stop stressing. But Dorrance refused. Because the company was his life. His legacy. His identity. Without it, he was nothing. So he kept working. From bed. From home. Giving orders. Making decisions. Trying to hold everything together. But he was failing. The company was declining. The expenses were crushing. The debt was mounting. And Dorrance, the soup tycoon who had built an empire, who had built a palace, was losing control. He died on September 21, 1930. 57 years old. Heart failure. At Woodcrest. In his bed. Surrounded by family. His wife. His children. His grandchildren. They were there. Not because they loved him. But because they were waiting. Waiting for the will. Waiting for the inheritance. Waiting to see who got what. The will was read a week later. In the library at Woodcrest. The family gathered. Lawyers. Accountants. Everyone silent. Tense. Dorrance's estate was valued at $115 million. $3.5 billion today. On paper. But the reality was more complicated. Most of the estate was tied up in Campbell Soup Company stock. Illiquid. Hard to sell. Especially during the Depression. The liquid assets, the cash, was less than $5 million. $155 million today. Barely enough to cover the estate taxes. Estate taxes in 1930 were brutal. The federal government took 40%. 40% of 115 million. 46 million. 1.4 billion today. Then state taxes. Another 10%. 11.5 million. 356 million today. Combined, the government took over 57 million. 1.7 billion today. More than half the estate. Gone. To taxes. The family was shocked. They had expected to inherit a fortune. And they did. But it was a fraction of what they thought. And most of it was illiquid. They couldn't touch it. Couldn't spend it. Not without selling the company. And selling the company, during the Depression, would have meant selling at a massive loss. So they held on. Hoping the economy would recover. Hoping the company would rebound. Hoping they could maintain the lifestyle. But hoping isn't a strategy. And the expenses didn't stop. Woodcrest still cost $150,000 a year. The staff still needed to be paid. The taxes still needed to be paid. The maintenance still needed to be done. And the income from the company was a fraction of what it had been. Ethel tried to maintain Woodcrest. For a few years. She reduced the staff. From 40 to 30. Then to 20. She stopped hosting parties. Stopped traveling. Stopped spending on luxuries. But even with the cuts, Woodcrest was draining the estate. By 1935, the liquid assets were gone. Spent. The family started selling off pieces. Art. Furniture. The chandeliers in the ballroom. One of them sold for $5,000. $155,000 today. A fraction of what Dorrance paid. But they needed the cash. John Jr. took over the company. In theory. But he was ill-equipped. He had no experience. No skills. No interest. He hired managers. Let them run the company. While he lived in New York. Spending. Partying. Ignoring the responsibilities. The company continued to decline. Not catastrophically. But steadily. Profits shrank. Market share eroded. Competitors, like Heinz, moved in. Took customers. Took revenue. By 1940, Campbell's Soup Company was no longer the dominant player. It was one of many. And the Dorrance fortune, the empire built on condensed soup, was crumbling. The family fought. Constantly. Over money. Over control. Over the inheritance. John Jr. and Eleanor barely spoke. Each blamed the other. For the decline. For the spending. For the loss. They hired lawyers. Fought in court. Over the estate. Over the company. Over who had the right to what. The legal fees were enormous. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Millions today. Money that should have been saved. Invested. Protected. Instead, it was wasted. On lawyers. On fights. On ego. Woodcrest sat empty. For years. The family couldn't afford to maintain it. Couldn't afford to sell it. Because the real estate market was dead. No one was buying estates during the Depression. No one could afford them. The house deteriorated. Windows broke. The roof leaked. Water seeped in. Damaged the wood paneling. Warped the floors. The gardens grew wild. The hedges became overgrown. The fountain stopped working. The koi pond dried up. The fish died. The servants' quarters were abandoned. Vandals broke in. Stole what was left. Copper pipes. Light fixtures. Anything of value. The estate that had cost $5 million to build. That had been the crown jewel of the Dorrance empire. Was now a ruin. Abandoned. Forgotten. Crumbling. In 1945, after World War II, the economy began to recover. And with it, the real estate market. Ethel Dorrance decided to sell Woodcrest. She couldn't maintain it. Couldn't afford it. Couldn't bear to look at it. Because it reminded her of everything they had lost. She listed it for $1 million. $31 million today. A fraction of what it cost to build. But no one bought it. Because even at that price, it was too expensive. Too big. Too costly to maintain. She dropped the price. To $750,000. To $500,000. Finally, in 1948, a buyer emerged. A religious organization. The Cabrini Sisters. A Catholic order. They bought Woodcrest for $350,000. $10.8 million today. A fraction of what it cost to build. A fraction of what it was worth. But Ethel was desperate. She needed the cash. Needed to move on. The Cabrini sisters converted Woodcrest into a school. A boarding school for girls. They renovated. Repaired the damage. Turned the ballroom into a chapel. Turned the bedrooms into dormitories. Turned the library into a classroom. The estate that had been a monument to excess became a place of education. Of service. Of humility. Ironic. The soup tycoon who built a palace to prove his worth. And it ended up as a school. Teaching values he never understood. The Campbell Soup Company survived. Barely. John Jr. eventually stepped down. Let professional managers take over. And slowly, the company recovered. By the 1960s, it was profitable again. Growing. Innovating. But the Dorrance family's control was diluted. Shares had been sold. To pay debts. To pay taxes. To pay for the lawsuits. By the 1970s, the family owned less than 50%. By the 1990s, less than 20%. They were still wealthy. The company was still valuable. But they were no longer in control. No longer the dominant force. The empire their grandfather built. The fortune he accumulated. It had been liquidated. Piece by piece. Generation by generation. Until almost nothing was left. John Thompson Dorrance Jr. died in 1989. He was 90 years old. He had lived a long life. But not a happy one. He had spent his entire life in his father's shadow. Trying to live up to a legacy he never understood. Trying to maintain a fortune he never earned. And failing. His estate was valued at $800 million. $25 billion today. Still enormous. But most of it was Campbell Soup stock. And when he died, the estate taxes took half. $400 million. $12.4 billion today. Gone. To the government. His children inherited the rest. And they immediately started fighting. Over control. Over money. Over the company. The lawsuits lasted. For years. Cost millions. Destroyed relationships. Fractured the family. Until finally, in 1996, they agreed. To sell. To liquidate the family's remaining shares in Campbell Soup Company. They sold to institutional investors. Hedge funds. Pension funds. Entities that didn't care about legacy. That only cared about profit. The sale raised over $2 billion. $62 billion today. The family split it. Divided it. And walked away. The Dorrance name was no longer associated with Campbell Soup. The company their grandfather built. The empire he created. It was gone. Sold. Liquidated. Turned into cash. And the cash? It was divided. Invested. Diversified. Turned into trust funds. Managed by wealth advisors. Lawyers. Accountants. People who would make sure the money lasted. Because the lesson had finally been learned. That wealth isn't permanent. That empires crumble. That you can't spend your way to legacy. That a palace doesn't make you noble. That a fortune built on innovation can be destroyed by ego. Woodcrest still stands. Sort of. The Cabrini sisters sold it in 2010. They couldn't afford to maintain it anymore. The building was too old. Too expensive. Too much. A developer bought it. Planned to turn it into luxury condos. Apartments. For the wealthy. Ironic. The estate built by a tycoon. For a tycoon. Would now house multiple families. Divided. Sectioned off. Turned into units. But the renovation never happened. The developer went bankrupt. The property sat empty. Again. For years. The windows broke. Again. The roof leaked. Again. Vandals returned. Stole what was left. The marble. The fixtures. Anything that could be sold. The estate that cost $5 million to build. That represented the peak of the Dorrance fortune. Is now a ruin. Again. Abandoned. Graffiti covered. Crumbling. You can visit it. Technically. It's not open to the public. But people sneak in. Urban explorers. Photographers. They walk through the Great Hall. See the graffiti on the walls. The broken marble. The rotting wood. They climb the grand staircase. See where the stained glass window used to be. Now just an empty frame. Broken glass on the floor. They walk through the ballroom. Imagine the chandeliers. The gold leaf. The parties. But all that's left is silence. Decay. Ghosts. The current owner, a real estate holding company, has tried to sell Woodcrest multiple times. But there are no buyers. Because even now, even in a recovered economy, no one wants it. It's too big. Too expensive. Too haunted. By the ghosts of the Dorrances. By the legacy of excess. By the reminder of what happens when you build your life on appearances. When you confuse wealth with worth. When you believe a palace can buy you immortality. The financial lesson of the Dorrance family is brutal. John Thompson Dorrance built one of the most successful companies in American history. Created a product that fed millions. Generated enormous wealth. Over $100 million. $3.5 billion today. But within 2 generations, the fortune was gone. Not because the company failed. But because the family couldn't manage the wealth. They spent recklessly. Lived lavishly. Built monuments to ego. And when the economy crashed, when the taxes came due, when the expenses exceeded the income, they had nothing left. No cash. No liquidity. Just assets that couldn't be sold. Or had to be sold at a loss. The estate taxes alone took over 50% of the fortune. 50%. Over $57 million. $1.7 billion today. Gone. To the government. Because the wealth was illiquid. Tied up in the company. In real estate. And when it came time to pay the taxes, they had to sell. At the worst possible time. At the worst possible prices. Taking massive losses. Destroying value. The trust funds that were supposed to protect the next generation. They didn't. Because the beneficiaries spent them. John Jr. burned through $5 million in less than a decade. Lavish living. Parties. Bad investments. No discipline. No oversight. No understanding of the value of money. Because he had never earned it. Never struggled. Never learned that wealth is fragile. That it requires protection. Requires management. Requires discipline. The family fought. For decades. Over money. Over control. Destroying relationships. Spending millions on legal fees. Money that could have been saved. Invested. Protected. Instead, it was wasted. On ego. On revenge. On trying to prove who deserved what. And in the end, no one won. Everyone lost. The palace, Woodcrest, it wasn't an asset. It was a liability. It cost $5 million to build. $150,000 a year to maintain. And when the family needed to sell it, it sold for $350,000. A 93% loss. Because no one wanted it. No one could afford it. And the market for estates, especially during economic downturns, is thin. Illiquid. Unreliable. Dorrance thought he was building a legacy. A monument. Something that would last forever. But he built a burden. A weight that crushed the next generation. That drained the fortune. That had to be sold at a loss. Just to survive. The invisible costs of wealth. The servants. The heating bills. The maintenance. The isolation. The paranoia. The pressure to maintain appearances. It's crushing. Most people see the palace. The chandeliers. The parties. And they think that's wealth. But they don't see the costs. The six-figure annual expenses. The constant repairs. The staff that has to be managed. The expectations that have to be met. The performance that never ends. Dorrance performed his entire life. Tried to prove he belonged. Tried to prove that soup money was real money. And he succeeded. In building a palace. In impressing the elite. But he failed. In building a sustainable fortune. In teaching his children discipline. In understanding that wealth requires more than just earning it. It requires protecting it. The fall of the Dorrance fortune wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single event. It was slow. Steady. A death by 1,000 cuts. The stock market crash. The estate taxes. The reckless spending. The family fights. The legal fees. The forced sales. Each one taking a piece. Until there was nothing left. Just a name. And a ruined palace. And a lesson. That wealth built on innovation can be destroyed by ego. That a fortune accumulated in one generation can be liquidated in two. That a palace doesn't make you noble. And that the invisible costs of maintaining appearances can destroy everything you've built. The Campbell Soup Company still exists. It's still profitable. Still selling soup. But it's a shadow of what it was. The market has changed. Tastes have changed. People want fresh food. Organic food. Not canned soup. Sales have declined. The stock price has stagnated. The company has tried to innovate. To diversify. But it's struggling. Because the world moved on. And Campbell didn't. The Dorrance family is still wealthy. Some of them. The descendants. But they're not tycoons. Not empire builders. They're trust fund kids. Living off the investments their great-grandfather made. Managing portfolios. Not companies. Not legacies. Just money. And they've learned. The hard way. That wealth is fragile. That it requires discipline. That you can't spend your way to happiness. That a palace is just a building. And that the real cost of greed isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in relationships. In health. In sanity. In the legacy you leave behind. John Thompson Dorrance built an empire. Made a fortune. Built a palace. And lost it all. Not because he wasn't smart. Not because he wasn't hardworking. But because he confused wealth with worth. Because he built a monument to himself instead of a legacy for his family. Because he spent like the fortune was infinite. And learned, too late, that nothing is infinite. Not wealth. Not empires. Not palaces. Not life. Woodcrest stands today. Crumbling. Abandoned. A monument to excess. To ego. To the cost of greed. The gates are rusted. The walls are cracked. The windows are broken. But the ghosts remain. The ghost of John Thompson Dorrance. Walking the halls. Counting the cost. Realizing, too late, that he paid too much. For too little. And left behind nothing but ruins. The soup tycoon who built a palace. And lost everything.